Let's do it.
Well, welcome to the Crested Butte Museum Virtual Learning Series with Dwayne Vandenbush. This is episode 3 of a 10-part series for Tuesday evenings at 6 p.m. All episodes will be on our YouTube channel called the Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum. Basically, just go to Google, Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum, YouTube, and it'll take you straight there. You can watch and share them with other people who are passionate about the Gunnison country history. This program is made possible by 2 sponsors, the Gunnison Trails and Hartman Castle Preservation Fund. We also want to give a big shout out to our wonderful donors and the members of our Crested Butte Museum. If you would like to support this program and others that the museum staff have put together, please visit our webpage, crestedbuttemuseum.com, or come and visit the museum. We have lots of fun things for sale done by local artists and authors, and we're always kind of shaking up some of our museum exhibit space. So come and check it out. We're open daily from 11 to 5 p.m. Really, we only have one main thing coming up. It's our yurt ski dinner, where we're going to be skiing out under the nice big fat moon in January 29th. It's a Monday from 6 to 9 p.m. We have a meal being catered by Matt Santor, who is our local caterer. And there's an optional wine pairing or a mocktail pairing. We're going to have a presentation about some skiing history and our first gondola. And Mike Horn, who is a board member here at the Crested Butte Museum, will be there along with Stu Donlin, our curator, to give that presentation. Information's on our webpage, or come on in and we'll give you some more at the cashier. So that's about all I have. I'm going to turn it over to Dwayne, and we look forward to tonight's presentation.
Thanks, Melinda. I want to mention to everybody that at the end, we're going to have a trivia question for a book that I've done called Around the Gunnison Country. It's first come, first serve. You'll do that on the chat board, and Melinda will tell you exactly how to do it when we're finished. So tonight, we're going to talk about Crested Butte generally, not so much the ethnic people. That'll come a little later, but the history of Crested Butte. Next week, we're going to talk about the narrow gauge railroads in the Gunnison country, the Denver South Park and Pacific, which came from Denver through the Alpine Tunnel into Gunnison, up Ohio Creek, and heading into Irwin, where it dead-ended because the mining boom at Irwin had ended. And then the other one was Denver and Rio Grande, Denver, Colorado Springs, Pueblo, Marshall Pass, into Gunnison, 1881, a year ahead of the South Park, and then 28 miles up to Crested Butte on November the 21st, 1881. So thanks, everybody, for being on. Now, some of you might be interested in knowing that in the last 4 to 5 days, we've had 57 inches of snow, and Gunnison has had about 20. So we finally got it, and the skiing is terrific. I skied today for a little bit, and it was excellent. All right, here we go on Crested Butte. Crested Butte is 28 miles north of Gunnison, right at the junction of the Slate River and Coal Creek. Elevation 8,885 feet, in the shadows of the Elk Mountains. And there you get a really great picture of the Elks with Crested Butte. It is no more beautiful sight in Colorado than that. And that was taken about 30 or 40 years ago. And Crested Butte is also a National Historic Site. Several laccoliths, those are mountains that stand alone, surround Crested Butte. Whetstone, Axtell, Carbon, Emmons, and Teocalli. Crested Butte's name came from the Hayden Survey in 1874, which said that it resembled the crest of a Spanish helmet. The father of Crested Butte was Howard Smith. He had heard about coal discovered there in 1877 by 2 brothers named Jennings. The following year, in 1878, he bought up most of the coal land near a creek that was now named Coal Creek, appropriately. In the early years, little attention was given to coal because of the rich silver mines that opened up nearby: Gothic, Irwin, Crystal, Schofield. Crested Butte became known as the gateway to the Elks. It was a supply town for all the nearby camps. In the year 1879, Jan Vandermeer, who had visited Crested Butte, reporter for the New York Times, said that Crested Butte had a smelter, a sawmill, boarding house, store, mining engineer's office, and 1 saloon. The saloon was described by Frank England, one of 45 men employed by Howard Smith. He said, and I'm quoting, "3 pine trees stood where the freight wagons unloaded near Coal Creek. One of these was felled and split to make a bar, and the men pulled a barrel of whiskey off the wagon and all hunted cans to drink out of. The drinks were 25 cents each." By the year 1880, Helen Hunt Jackson, the famous writer who had written Century of Dishonor about the poor treatment of Native Americans in the U.S., declared this, and I'm quoting about Crested Butte as she visited. "Every road leading out of Crested Butte comes out before long in a mining camp. It is a natural center for supplies, and that is the reason for being. All roads now led into Crested Butte." Now you're looking at Elk Avenue in Crested Butte, and you're looking west. And this was a picture in 1882 as Crested Butte began to boom. There were 2 routes into Crested Butte very early. One ran up Ohio Creek, over 10,033-foot high Ohio Pass, and then along Coal Creek into Crested Butte. The other ran from Gunnison past Almont and Jack's cabin into Crested Butte. Before November of 1881, when the Denver and Rio Grande came in, all traffic came via Barlow and Sanderson and other stage and freight wagons into Crested Butte along what is now kind of Highway 135. Then on November 21, 1881, the Rio Grande of William Jackson Palmer built his narrow gauge line into Crested Butte from Gunnison. A new day had arrived. And there's a good picture of 268, which is right by the Gunnison Museum today, right at the depot in 1886. In July of 1880, a year before, Howard Smith and Associates incorporated Crested Butte as a town. Its future as the gateway to the Elks now became much brighter when huge amounts of coal were found surrounding the town. Now, there's another great shot of a whole bunch of loaded coal cars going out of the Crested Butte depot, heading for Gunnison and then Marshall Pass, and over Marshall Pass into Pueblo for the Colorado Fuel and Iron steel mills. And that again is in the 1880s. Eventually, 9 coal mines were opened near the town. The Big Mine on the Bench, the Jokerville on the west end of Crested Butte, the Robinson, the Pueblo, and the Buckley just south of town, the Pershing and the Peanut up today's Lower Loop, Smith Hill 4 miles up the Slate River, and Floresta, a great anthracite mine 11 miles to the west. Howard Smith sold much of his coal property to the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company in 1881. By August of the previous year, Crested Butte had grown to 400 people, with 50 business houses, a smelter, 3 sawmills, and a new hotel. The Forest Queen still stands today. The Pioneer Toll Road joining Crested Butte with Irwin, 10 miles west along Coal Creek, came in 1880. It's now a mountain bike trail that runs from basically Lake Irwin into Crested Butte. Crested Butte now benefited from the #1 silver town in the world, Aspen. And there is the #1 silver town in the world in the 1880s, Aspen, Colorado, along the Roaring Fork of the Colorado. And it was just across the mountains from Crested Butte. That great mining camp didn't get a railroad until 1887. So all of its silver had to come on the backs of burros, each one carrying 200 pounds of ore, over East Maroon Pass at 11,800 feet, through Gothic, and then to the railhead at Crested Butte. And then supplies were taken back by the burros, again, 200 pounds of supplies on their back to Aspen. Financially, this was a major boom for Crested Butte, all the way until Aspen finally got a railroad in 1887. Near the top of 11,800-foot high East Maroon Pass, a little below it at Copper Lake, was a dinner station, stables, a boarding house. It was quite a sight to see 500 or so burros crossing the pass, going to and from between Crested Butte and Aspen. They were called Rocky Mountain Canaries. The famous Elk Mountain House on Elk Avenue, Crested Butte's answer to the Levita, opened up in late 1881. There it is, right on Elk Avenue. The grand opening came in 1882. 150 guests, a grand ball and supper with 86 foods on the menu. The hotel was 3 stories high, 34 feet by 100, 42 rooms, and was built by Howard Smith for $40,000. And there it is, a good-looking house, right about where Donita's was later on. Crested Butte got 3 other hotels in the early 1880s. Forest Queen's still there, the Crested Butte House, and Mrs. John Sanger's house, all on Elk Avenue. The first school in town was a frame building above the coke ovens on the bench. Not a very good location. Soon another frame building on the other side of town took over. And then finally in 1883, the Old Rock Schoolhouse, which still stands today, was built. By 1916, Crested Butte had the largest school population in the county. And there is the Old Rock School, still standing today with all the students in front of it around 1884. In 1881, 2 miles above town, Coal Creek was tapped for water with a reservoir built on the hill west of town. A year later, a telephone line connected Crested Butte with Gunnison. And in 1889, the Crested Butte Light and Power Company came and gave Thomas Edison's direct current electricity to the town. Mail in the early years was carried by individual mailmen like Allen Fred Johnson, who carried the mail between Crystal and Crested Butte, braving a trail that ran by Emerald Lake, the Devil's Punch Bowls, and the Crystal Canyon through tremendous avalanche country in the winter. Louis Barthel was the legendary mail carrier in Crested Butte. His route ran along the East River between Crested Butte and Gothic, right below today's road. One day he had to carry a 50-gallon can of coal oil on his back on skis in the winter to a miner in Gothic. Got very angry. The next month, the guy ordered hip boots, and Louis Barthel brought him in one at a time to get even with the guy who had ordered the coal oil. The danger, there was another route that ran between Crested Butte and Aspen for a short time, up Brush Creek, over Pearl Pass at 12,715 feet, and down Castle Creek to Ashcroft and Aspen. The danger very great. In 1885, a newspaper reported, quote, "The remains of A.C. Adair, the Crested Butte and Aspen mail carrier, who lost his life by a snowslide on Pearl Pass, has been found, and his remains will be buried in Aspen." The main avenue in Crested Butte in 1881 was Maroon Street, but the arrival of the Denver and Rio Grande late that year changed it to Elk Avenue. In the center of Maroon Street, 4 blocks were laid off in 1881. A plaza was located in the form of a diamond, in the center of which was a flagstaff. The plaza was to have 3 artificial lakes along with shade trees, evergreens, and shrubbery. A red letter day in the history of Crested Butte occurred on November 21, 1881, when the narrow gauge Rio Grande arrived in town, having come from Denver to Salida, then over Marshall Pass, into Gunnison, and 28 miles into Crested Butte. And there it is. You can see Mount Emmons in the background, and it's right near the water tank. You can see the water tank in the background, heading towards Gunnison from Crested Butte very early in the 1880s. Now, cattle, ore, and lumber could be shipped out and supplies brought in. Crested Butte, amazingly, had been sustainable before the railroad arrived. It was able to produce beef, milk, cheese, butter, along with fresh vegetables from gardens. It got a lot of wild strawberries and raspberries and hazelnuts. And then when the railroad came in, of course, a lot more supplies could come in. By the summer of 1882, Crested Butte was growing rapidly, now had 1,000 people, 5 hotels, 1 bank, 12 saloons, 3 livery stables, 3 restaurants, 5 sawmills, 2 doctors, and ominously, many lawyers. City Hall was built in 1883, with the town's fire department located in the bottom and business meetings held upstairs. The Union Congregational Church was built in 1882, still there today. And in 1894, St. Patrick's Catholic Church appeared, still there today, privately owned. The decade of the 1880s saw the price of silver plummet until prices collapsed in the silver panic of 1893, when silver now went for 58 cents an ounce. The good times were all gone, and Tin Cup, Gothic, Crystal, Irwin, Pitkin, White Pine, all the great silver towns now became ghost towns. Crested Butte was no longer the gateway to the Elks. Now coal was king, and that would be the destiny of the town. The early residents of Crested Butte had been cousin Jacks, primarily from England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. And they were Protestant, and they spoke the English language. They worked in the silver camps and coal mines, and they were called cousin Jacks because whenever one person got killed in a mine, somebody would go up to the foreman and say, "My cousin Jack can do that," and another guy was on his way. Their wives were known as cousin Jennies. Then they had names like Gardner, Ross, Flynn, McCluskey, Murray, and McNeil. In the 1890s, a new group of immigrants came into Crested Butte. They were from the Austrian-Hungarian Empire of Southeastern Europe, from Italy, Slovenia, Slovakia, and Austria. They had strange-sounding names like Sporsic, Mihelic, Saya, Panyan, Capuchin, Frismanich, and Sedmak, and they fled poverty and war in Europe. You get a great look now at Fisher's Tavern in Crested Butte. And lining up at Fisher's Tavern are people with names like Panyan and Stefanik and Evanston and Slogar and a lot of others. Mrs. Fisher, who's on board tonight, hopefully will be able to identify a lot of those for me. These people were Catholic. They did not speak English. Hence, they were regarded with suspicion and not readily accepted. There are 3 of them working at the Peanut Mine up today's Lower Loop. These Southeastern European people would dominate Crested Butte from the time of their arrival well into the 20th century, and a lot more about them in a future podcast. Crested Butte was not an appealing place after coal mining began. Most of the trees have been cut for mine props, railroad ties, and cabins. Streams were polluted by mine tailings and sawdust, and a black mist of pollution from coal mines hung over the town. 1 day a week, Monday, the coke ovens were shut down, and that was the day the Crested Butte women did their washing, hanging their clothes on clotheslines outside and free from the dirty air of the coke ovens. I want to mention during those, Crested Butte also had a baseball team, and the baseball team was pretty good, and they had legendary games with Gunnison. And in Gunnison, a lot of betting and a lot of drinking went on. In a newspaper account in 1886, Gunnison beat Crested Butte with the game called early because of bad treatment of the umpire and the Gunnison fans by Crested Butte fans. Here's the newspaper report, and I quote, "The manner of receiving guests by the people of Crested Butte when they come from Gunnison is about the same as that practiced by the Visigoths and the Vandals in the Dark Ages. The score of the game was 24-18 Gunnison in a game interrupted by rain, snow, and dogfights on the field." The rivalry between Crested Butte and Gunnison reared its ugly head during that time. Ernest Ingerhall, a writer who came to Crested Butte in 1884, commented on the town then, and I quote, "There are mines here, But the key to the town is found in the coal banks, and at night when the blaze of the coke oven sends a ruddy glare upon the overhanging woodlands in the snug town, one can appreciate the far-seeing expectations. Woodland at night when the blaze of the coke oven sends a ruddy glare over the overhanging woodlands in the snug town. And one can appreciate the far-seeing expectation, leading the people to say that they live in the Pittsburgh of the West. The top coal mine in the 1880s was the Jokerville, which produced bituminous coal. It was located on the west side of town. It opened in 1881 and was always considered dangerous because of high quantities of methane gas that one cannot smell. Below the Jokerville very early were Crested Butte's prized beehive coke ovens, producers of high quality and much sought after coke. By 1884, 164 coke ovens were operating, made out of fire brick and encased with stone. And there you get a great look at them, with railroad tracks, of course, running down below, soon to take the coke over to the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. The intense heat and dangerous fumes made by the tenders' job made it one of the most dangerous in the coal industry. By 1884, 30 workers turned out 175 tons of coke per day and 1,000 tons a week. And there you get a good idea of the railroad train, the coke ovens, and the fumes coming from the coke ovens with Crested Butte in the background. The ovens were heated red hot before the coal was put in. It then baked for 48 hours, driving out most of the impurities. After 48 hours, the ovens were allowed to cool, and then the coke was loaded by fork onto waiting Denver and Rio Grande railroad cars next to the ovens and taken to the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. The intense heat and dangerous fumes made the oven tender's job one of the most dangerous in the coal industry. But by 1884, 30 workers turned out 175 tons of coke per day and 1,000 tons a week. With its coke ovens, Crested Butte became a major part of the United States Industrial Revolution. Coking coal from Crested Butte, limestone from the quarries located on the east side of Monarch Pass, owned by the CF&I, and iron from near Trinidad, also owned by the CF&I, came together in Pueblo at the steel mills. In 1856, an Englishman named Henry Bessemer had invented the blast furnace, final step in converting iron into steel. Coke, lime, and iron went into the furnace, which then had air blasted into it, eliminating more impurities. And that is how iron was converted into steel in the blast furnace. Iron melts at 2,300 degrees, but steel melts at 4,600 degrees. Steel allowed the Industrial Revolution in the U.S., and Crested Butte was a big part of that success. It was cold on that fateful morning of January the 24th, 1884 in Crested Butte. The second shift of workers in the Jokerville finished work at 7 a.m. They exchanged greetings with the first shift as the latter reported for work. A half hour later at 7:30, a tremendous blast shattered the silence in town. Billowing smoke came from the Jokerville. The mine explosion had destroyed 100 feet of the tipple and smashed one of the ventilation fans which supplied air inside. Most of the Scottish, Welsh, English, Irish, and German workers, cousin Jacks, inside never had a chance, and they were killed by the blast. Luck was the most important for survival that day. You're looking at a Harper's Weekly caricature of the aftermath of the blast at the Jokerville mine, and that appeared in Harper's Weekly on February the 16th, 1884. Luck, I said, was key. John Cashin led 10 men from 1,800 feet from the mine entrance to safety, stumbling over rocks, timbers, and corpses as they came. After a half hour, they came into the open to the cheers of those outside, who now had false hope that maybe more people could come out. On the other hand, 17 miners, uninjured by the explosion, had worked their way to within 200 feet of the mine entrance in safety. Then, because the giant ventilation fan was not working because of the blast, they ran out of air. With safety in sight, they died near the entrance. 61 men died in the Jokerville that day, the worst mining disaster in Colorado history up to that time, and still the third worst up to today. 46 men were buried in a common grave in the Crested Butte Cemetery. Today, a beautiful memorial honors them at the cemetery. And there again is a photo from Harper's Weekly on February the 16th of the dead men in one of the buildings outside of the mine entrance, and the women identifying their husbands and sons and brothers. And when they identified them, a little sheet of paper was put with the name on the belly of each one of the miners. Seeping methane gas was the cause of the explosion, with the company very negligent. Mine foreman John Gibson had only been in the mine 6 times in 1 year because he thought it too dangerous. Geologist Arthur Lakes, who had visited the mine, declared, quote, "A ticking sound is heard always from the escape of gases in the coal. The coal in this mine contains the greatest amount of dangerous gas in the state." The CF&I was found not guilty of negligence, and the CF&I gave $1,000 to a miners' fund for widows, and the matter was considered closed. Fires were always a problem in Crested Butte because buildings are made out of wood, close together, and there was little fire protection, especially in the winter. The 1890 fire came with high wind and burned 15 buildings along Elk Avenue, doing $50,000 in damage. After that, fire hydrants were installed. And there you get a good idea of some of the buildings destroyed by fire. That's the fire hall in the background, and we got a picture coming up of it alone. In 1893, another fire came, with water frozen in the new hydrants during a bitterly cold January day. Much of the entire block on Elk Avenue was burned. 50 pounds of powder was used to blow up 2 buildings to keep the fire from spreading, but they used too much powder. Along with dynamite and fuel in the buildings, they blew up, and this took out 2 more additional buildings, drove a gaping hole in the fire hall, and broke almost every window in town. And their City Hall, or the Fire Hall, still exists today, built in 1883, with a gaping hole caused by the use of too much dynamite in trying to keep that fire from spreading. Fires in 1901 and 1909 did $50,000 damage, and the latter burned the buildings of the CF&I on the bench. The top coal mine in Crested Butte was the CF&I Big Mine, on the bench, which opened in 1894. It was right below steep Gibson Ridge to the south. By 1902, it employed 400 men, produced 1,000 tons of coal a day, and had 6 miles of track underground. There's a great look at it. You can see Crested Butte in the background, the Rio Grande train underneath. You can see the tipple, the mine entrance, and right to the right above the tipple there, you see that white? Those are 156 steps covered up so snow wouldn't hit it, and that's how people got from Crested Butte up to work at the mine. And it was a very steep series of steps as they came up. Each mule was worth $70, and they worked in the mine. It was often said that mules were more important than men because they cost more. The Big Mine was the 3rd largest coal mine in Colorado, and it had the best quality bituminous coal. But in 1894 and 1910, 16 years, the Big Mine turned out 2 million tons of coal and 500,000 tons of coke. Men in the big mine averaged $4 a day in wages. Accidents were common. The big mine operated for 58 years before closing in 1952. The coming of oil and gas and electricity displaced coal. Transportation costs were much higher than coal gotten from Trinidad. Crested Butte had been a great coal town for nearly 60 years, but there had been some problems. Number one, immigrants had always been regarded as suspicious. Number two, there were damaging fires. Number three, periodic strikes came as coal began to be replaced by oil and gas. Number four, there were mine accidents which killed many. Number five, there was exploitation by the CF&I and the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. Number six, there was continuous rivalry with Gunnison. And number seven, epidemics and elements like avalanches killed a lot of people. Other coal mines operated in and around Crested Butte. One of the biggest was the Smith Hill Anthracite Mine, located 4 miles north of Crested Butte along the Slate River. The Smith Hill Mine was on top of a hill, and a gravity tram, 1,638 feet long, with a 33-degree drop, carried the coal from the mine to the huge breaker along the Slate River below called Anthracite. There you get a great look at Smith Hill up above, and there is the gravity tram. The full coal cars going down carried the empty coal cars going up. And on the bottom, you can see that coal car. In a moment, you're going to see the breaker down below. The anthracite breaker down below, and there it is 80 feet high, built with 360,000 board feet of lumber, built in 1883, the largest anthracite coal breaker west of Pennsylvania. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad ran to anthracite, 4 miles up the Slate River from Crested Butte, and then carried the anthracite coal to the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. Another great anthracite mine opened up 11 miles to the west of Crested Butte, near Anthracite Creek in 1887, called Floresta. And there it is in the 1890s, with a great coal breaker on the left side. More about that right now. Floresta's coal breaker, 5 stories high, was built in 1898 for $98,000, and it surpassed anthracite as the largest west of Pennsylvania. 114 feet high, 76 feet wide, and 124 feet long. 5 levels broke up coal into 4 different sizes: orange, nut, pea, and slack. And you can see where the coal came out of the mine, ran along tracks, and then hit the breaker, and at every level it's broken up into different sizes. And there's the Rio Grande Railroad waiting underneath to take that coal to the CF&I steel mills. The Denver and Rio Grande ran a line to Floresta, but because of tremendous snows along the route, was only able to run for about May to November. The coal mines of Floresta shut down in 1918 at the end of World War I. There you can see one of the problems that occurred between Crested Butte and Floresta. That is a rotary engine blowing snow off the track, heading out of Crested Butte and trying to break through to Floresta, and usually November was it. The coal mines of Floresta shut down in 1918 because of the end of World War I and decreased demand. The problem of keeping the mine open for 6 months out of the year and the coming of oil and gas. There's another good look. Sometimes the rotary engine wouldn't work because you had timbers and rocks that came down in an avalanche. And then 50 to 100 men would dig it out. A lot of people in Crested Butte have had a good example of digging out their homes, but this is a little above and beyond. Other coal mines around Crested Butte included the Pueblo, the Robinson, and the Buckley just south of town. And there you get a good look at the Horace Mine, also called the Pueblo Mine, south of town. There's the mine, there's the temple, there's the tram, there's the Rio Grande down below, getting the bituminous coal and heading to the CF&I steel mills. That's Mount Emmons in the background and Crested Butte in the background. Other mines were located up along the Peanut and Pershing. That was northwest of town along today's Lower Loop. Coal had been king in Crested Butte for over 70 years. Here's a good example of the Peanut Mine. That's 1927, located along the Lower Loop in Crested Butte today. Coal, as I said, had been king in Crested Butte for over 70 years. And when it ended in 1952, the town faced a very uncertain future. 3 years after the close of the big mine, the Denver and Rio Grande pulled out its railroad tracks, and Crested Butte's population, once 1,800, plummeted to 300. The end seemed near for a once great coal town. There, we'll keep on that a little bit. That's January of 52. That's about when the mine closed down. Now you can see the tremendous amount of snow in Crested Butte. I have no idea what that car is doing on the right side of Elk Avenue. I can guarantee you it's not going anywhere, because most people at that time, because the roads weren't plowed, put their cars up on blocks for the wintertime and took the battery out. An attempt at a mining revival came in 1957 when the Keystone Mine, which had turned out silver, lead, and zinc off and on since 1881, reopened with an $800,000 mill put in by the American Mining and Smelting Company. That was worked on and off for about 15 years before closing, so it never really did very much for the town. Here you get a good look at the Keystone Mine. Few knew it at the time, but that mine, located on Mount Emmons, was in the middle of the fourth largest and richest deposit of molybdenum, a hardener of steel, in the world. Now that's a good look at all the tailings that came out of the Keystone Mine before a treatment plant was put in, and all of that debris flowed into Coal Creek, which was Crested Butte's drinking supply. In the 1950s, Crested Butte became a near ghost town, with people leaving, houses selling for $500, and lots for $50. In 1958, a sliver of hope. Dr. Hubert Smith, an MD and lawyer from Texas, began a law science academy in Crested Butte, bought up many homes on the cheap. He hosted summer institutes for doctors and lawyers and gave a lot of publicity about the summer and winter and the outdoors. Tourism was rearing its head. The age of coal gave way to the age of snow when Dick Eflin and Fred Rice came into town in 1961. Both were ex-fraternity brothers at the University of Kansas. Eflin had the vision for a ski area. Fred Rice had the money. Now there you get a good picture of Dick Eflin, who just passed away a few years ago, playing his guitar at the warming house. His wife Liz is on the right, and Paul Johnston is the guy on the left. Johnson later on owned and operated the Ore Bucket, the first building right where the Chamber of Commerce is today, where people could stay for the ski area, and then later on went to Vail and opened up the Tivoli. Dick Eflin, as I said, had the vision, and he and Fred Rice bought out the Matt and Rudy Malensic Ranch at the base of Crested Butte Mountain, and then got Forest Service permits on additional land. The Crested Butte ski area opened during the winter of 1961 and 62. J-Bar, Rope Tow, and T-Bar. In January of 63, gondola was put in. Now you get a good look at Father Leo McKenna blessing the gondola in January of 63. Minutes after the blessing, the gondola broke down 50 feet out of the house. And then, to make matters worse, Father McKenna slipped and broke his kneecap in the parking lot going to his car. A very inauspicious beginning for the gondola. I was there when it opened. The ski area went into bankruptcy in 1970, and it was owned by Kansas City Banks for 4 years, and then sold to the Callaway Company of Georgia, which owned the area from 1970 to 2004. They then sold to Tim and Diane Muller, who owned Okemo and Sunapee ski areas in the east. And finally, in 2019, Vail bought the ski area and runs it today. The Crested Butte ski area is well known today for having some of the finest extreme skiing in the world, 400,000 skier days a year. And today, Crested Butte is thriving with a population of 1,700, 6,000 living in the East River Valley in such places as Mount Crested Butte, Crested Butte South, Riverland, Trappers Crossing, alpine and Nordic skiing, one of the great mountain biking areas in the world, the majestic Elk Mountains, and being in one of the top wildflowers in the state has made Crested Butte a top tourist attraction in Colorado. That photo you're looking at was taken by a good friend of mine named Bob Arnold, who worked at Western, and that is Christmas Day in the evening, 1958, looking at Crested Butte at night with Crested Butte Mountain in the background. When one thinks of Crested Butte today, he or she thinks of Flushing, Winnetoc, 4th of July celebrations, arts and craft festivals, the Grand Traverse, Pete Dundas polka dances, music festivals, and one of the best public schools in the nation. But to most people who live here, Crested Butte will always be a state of mind rather than a place. And that concludes the history of Crested Butte. Now, Melinda is going to tell everybody how they can come up with the answers for the trivia question, which I will give after Melinda gives the instructions.
All right, so I hope you took good notes.
First come, first serve,
First
right?
come, first serve. So you're going to enter your answer, or you think you know the answer, into the chat box, and we will be watching it on the side here. So first come, first serve, chat box. Ready?
All right,
Go.
here we go on the question. I want to know the 2 top coal breakers in the Gunnison country near Crested Butte that were the largest west of Pennsylvania when built. One in 1883, one in 1898. 2 top coal breakers. No, Jokerville and Florescent, no. Smith Hill and Floresta. You got to be a little more specific than that. But Smith Hill and Floresta's close. Jokerville and Anthracite, no. Jokerville and Smith Hill, no. We're still looking for an answer. There we go, Anthracite and Floresta.
Annie.
Now, Annie, I know that you want a book early. You want to give up your book to somebody who doesn't have it, or I'll be happy to send you another one. Why don't you let us know? Yeah, Marianne Regan says congrats. Annie, let us know on the book. I've got another book I can send to you. My boyfriend snuck in with that answer. Pass it on to someone else if needed. Okay, we're passing it on to someone else. Who else had Anthracite and Floresta?
Only Annie did. We stopped there.
Only Annie did. Okay, I'm going to come up with another trivia question. Annie, you can't answer this one. And I'm thinking, the trivia question is, outside of the Jokerville, outside of Floresta and Anthracite, outside of the big mine, there were 5 other coal mines that opened up in Crested Butte. Name 2 other of the great coal mining areas in Crested Butte outside of those 4. You can't name the Jokerville, the big mine, Anthracite, or Floresta. Horace and Peanut. Bill Grierson's got it. Bill, we want your address. Very good. Very good. We'll get your address. Now, everybody, thanks a lot for being on. Next week, we are going to have the narrow gauge railroads with a lot of great photos. Are there any comments, any questions that anybody has? I see. There you go. We got Bill's address there. Thanks, Carol, for the comments. And Carol's grandfather worked at Floresta. Carol, if you got any information or photos I can scan of Floresta, let me know. Any other questions or comments that anybody has? Yeah, thank you very much, Marianne and Michael McNair and Pam. Oh, Pam Williams, thanks a lot, Pam.
We have Cameron Day.
Yeah, what was the covered steps on the bench? Was the covered step? Yes, it was in the 30s and the 40s. And I think it was up there and really until the mine closed up. Well, thank you, Burton Showalter. We appreciate the kind words.
Carol's gonna look in and see what she has.
Thank you, Carol. Any other comments or questions, everybody? Yeah, one, you mentioned Maroon was Main Street. I think, what was the diamond you mentioned? When did it move to Elk? It was the original Main Street, and that's when you had the diamond and the plaza planned there. When the Rio Grande came in, the depot was on Elk Avenue. So in 1881, very early, Elk Avenue became the main street of Crested Butte because that's where the depot was, just to the east of town. Any other questions or comments? If not, thanks everybody for being on. Gannon Mendez, thank you. Tell Priscilla hi.
When did you come to Crested Butte?
Yeah, Dave, when did I come to Crested Butte? Well, I came to Gunnison to teach in 1962. So I came 1 year after the ski area opened. So I kind of grew up with it. Now I'm old, unfortunately. All right, everybody. Thanks very much. Shannon Bush and Melinda Holm, over and out.
Thank you, everyone.